Something is wrong in America, and the data proves your gut is right. Life in America feels different lately, and it's not just you imagining it. Since 2020, real disposable income has fallen for most households, even while official GDP numbers look strong. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans now say they feel financially worse off than 5 years ago, yet they're working more hours than ever. Stress-related illnesses are up, trust in institutions is at historic lows, and for the first time in modern history, a majority of adults say they don't believe their children will be better off than they were. That belief used to be the psychological backbone of this country. When it breaks, everything feels off: relationships, work, motivation, even time itself. This isn't a mood shift or a social media trend. It's a structural change happening in real time, and if you felt more exhausted, more detached, or more aware lately, that's because your nervous system is responding to a reality most people haven't fully named yet. Life in America feels different because the rules that shaped the last 50 years are quietly expiring, and you're living through the moment they stop working. The subtle collapse of time, energy, and mental bandwidth. Something feels off lately, and it's not just politics or money, it's time itself. Not in a mystical way, but in a brutally practical one. Americans today work more fragmented hours than at any point in recorded history, even compared to the Industrial Revolution. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average full-time worker now experiences over 14 task switches per hour, meaning your brain is being yanked from one cognitive demand to another every 4 minutes. That level of interruption wasn't even possible 20 years ago. Add to that the fact that productivity has technically risen while felt productivity has collapsed, a phenomenon psychologists now call effort inflation. You're doing more, faster, under tighter deadlines, but the payoff feels smaller every year. That's not imagination. Wage growth adjusted for inflation has lagged behind productivity by over 40% since 1979, meaning the extra mental and physical output is no longer coming back to you. Your nervous system knows this before your mind does. Cortisol levels measured in routine blood work have risen steadily since 2020, even among people who don't report stress. This is chronic load, the sense that no matter how hard you push, the treadmill speeds up anyway. And here's the part most people don't realize. When time feels compressed, societies historically enter periods of instability. Historians note the same pattern before the fall of the Roman Republic, and during late-stage Soviet life, people reported days blurring together, exhaustion without cause, and a constant low-grade anxiety they couldn't explain. That's because when effort disconnects from reward, the human brain starts rejecting the system itself. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You're reacting normally to an abnormal environment that drains attention faster than it replenishes meaning. Life feels different because your energy is being consumed at a rate this society was never designed to sustain. The quiet breakdown of trust in everyday systems. One of the biggest reasons life feels strange right now is because Americans are losing trust in things that used to be invisible. Not the government that's obvious, but the background systems you weren't supposed to think about. Food, healthcare, education, infrastructure, even basic data. For the first time since tracking began, a majority of Americans say they double-check information from doctors, not because they distrust medicine, but because insurance-driven care has turned healthcare into a throughput machine. Hospitals now optimize for billing codes, not outcomes. A fact openly admitted in healthcare management journals. Meanwhile, food safety recalls have doubled over the last decade, not due to worse hygiene, but because supply chains are longer, faster, and more fragile. Your groceries travel farther, sit longer, and change hands more often, meaning when something goes wrong, it goes wrong at scale. This erosion of trust creates constant low-level vigilance. You read labels more. You research more. You hesitate more. That mental tax adds up. Sociologists call this ambient uncertainty, and it's strongly correlated with burnout and depersonalization. When systems fail quietly instead of catastrophically, people don't panic, they withdraw. They stop believing anyone's really in charge. Historically, that's a precursor phase to social realignment. You saw it in pre-war Europe, in post-colonial states, and in every late-stage empire where institutions kept operating but lost legitimacy. Life feels different because you're subconsciously auditing everything now. You're scanning for hidden costs, fine print, and quiet compromises. That's not paranoia, that's adaptation. A society where trust decays doesn't collapse overnight. It becomes heavier to live inside. And you feel that weight every time something that should just work suddenly doesn't. The emotional flatlining of the American dream. The American dream didn't explode, it emotionally went numb. Home ownership, career growth, retirement. These ideas still exist, but they no longer pull people forward the way they used to. Behavioral economists noticed something alarming after 2021. Aspiration itself began declining. Younger adults aren't just pessimistic, they're disengaged. Surveys show fewer people actively planning for long-term goals, not because they don't want them, but because the pathway feels abstract and unstable. When effort no longer guarantees progress, motivation rewires. This is why side hustles feel exhausting instead of empowering, why promotions feel hollow, why even success stories sound scripted. The dream hasn't vanished, it's been financialized, gamified, and delayed so long that emotionally, people stopped investing in it. Historically, this is dangerous territory. Societies don't fracture when people are poor. They fracture when people feel stuck inside systems that demand loyalty without offering dignity. You can see it in declining birth rates, rising loneliness, and the surge in soft exits, quiet quitting, digital nomadism, opting out without rebellion. Life feels different because meaning has been deferred too many times. And when meaning erodes, people don't riot, they drift. That drift is what you're feeling. Not collapse yet, not revival either. Just the unsettling sense that the old script no longer applies, and no one has handed out a new one. The psychological shock of living in a country that no longer makes sense. At some point, maybe without even realizing it, you started noticing that the explanations don't line up anymore. The numbers don't match the lived experience. Headlines say one thing, your day-to-day reality says another, and your brain is stuck trying to reconcile the two. This is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance at scale, and it's not something humans are built to tolerate for long periods of time. When a society's official story no longer matches what people see with their own eyes, stress doesn't show up as panic, it shows up as confusion, irritability, numbness, and withdrawal. You're not crazy for feeling like conversations feel pointless lately. Studies out of Stanford and MIT show that when people feel they can't meaningfully affect outcomes, their brains reduce emotional investment as a protective mechanism. That's why everything feels flatter. Jokes don't land the same. Wins don't feel like wins. Even outrage feels recycled. You're watching a country run on narratives that stopped working years ago about upward mobility, meritocracy, fairness, and stability, while the lived structure underneath has quietly changed. For example, nearly 60% of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck, yet consumer spending is still propping up GDP because people are financing survival. That's not growth, that's deferred collapse disguised as confidence. And your nervous system knows it. This is why life feels unreal sometimes, like you're watching it instead of participating in it. In past societies, this phase showed up right before major reordering events, not revolutions at first, but mass disengagement, loss of faith in expertise, and the feeling that no one is telling the whole truth. You're not too online. You're responding to a mismatch between reality and narrative that's becoming impossible to ignore. America feels different because coherence is breaking down, and humans are wired to feel that fracture long before they can explain it. The silent realization that effort no longer guarantees security. One of the most destabilizing shifts happening right now isn't loud, dramatic, or even openly discussed. It's the slow realization that doing everything right no longer guarantees safety. Work hard, stay employed, avoid major mistakes, follow the rules for generations. That equation produced stability. Now it doesn't. And that realization hits people at a gut level. You can feel it when people talk about the future without conviction, when long-term planning feels risky instead of responsible. Data backs this up in uncomfortable ways. Emergency savings are shrinking even among middle-income households. A growing number of Americans making over six figures report they couldn't handle a 6-month disruption without major damage. That's not failure, that's fragility. And fragile systems create anxious populations. What makes this moment unique is that instability isn't coming from one source. It's layered. Housing costs, insurance premiums, medical deductibles, education debt, energy prices, each one alone might be manageable. But together, they create a constant background threat. You're always one event away from freefall. Historically, this is when people stop identifying with the system entirely. Not in anger and resignation. They stop believing institutions will catch them if they fall. That's why mutual aid, informal economies, and parallel systems quietly grow during these periods. People adapt before they rebel. Life feels different because subconsciously, you know you're more on your own than you were taught to expect. That knowledge changes how you move through the world. You become more cautious, more selective, less trusting, more inward. It's not weakness, it's recalibration. America feels unfamiliar because the social contract has thinned, and you're living in the gap between what was promised and what's actually there. The fragmentation of identity in a hyper-performative society. It's getting harder to know who anyone really is anymore, including yourself. Not because people are lying more, but because identity itself has become fragmented under constant performance pressure. Social media didn't just change communication, it rewired self-perception. You're now expected to hold multiple public-facing identities at once: professional, political, cultural, moral, and keep them consistent under surveillance. That kind of cognitive load didn't exist for previous generations. Anthropologists point out that historically, identity was reinforced by stable roles in long-term communities. Today, algorithms reward volatility, outrage, and constant self-definition. This creates a strange emotional fatigue where people feel simultaneously exposed and unseen. You can feel it in conversations that stay shallow, in relationships that feel conditional, in the sense that everyone's on all the time. Psychologists have tracked a sharp rise in dissociation, depersonalization, and emotional flattening since 2020, not as pathology, but as adaptation. When your sense of self is constantly evaluated, your mind learns to pull back to protect itself. Life feels different because authenticity has become risky. People self-censor, compartmentalize, and retreat into smaller circles or into themselves. Historically, societies entering periods of instability show the same pattern: public conformity paired with private alienation. You're not imagining it when you feel like connection takes more effort now. That's the cost of living inside a system that monetizes attention and identity at the same time. And when identity fractures, so does belonging. America feels colder not because people care less, but because caring openly has become expensive. The erosion of shared reality and the loneliness of seeing it. At a certain point, you realize the hardest part isn't what's happening, it's trying to talk about it. Conversations stall. Eye contact breaks. People change the subject. That's because shared reality itself is thinning. Media ecosystems no longer inform collectively. They isolate selectively. Two people can live in the same city, work similar jobs, and consume entirely different versions of the world. Neurologists studying perception have shown that when people are fed conflicting narratives over long periods, the brain stops seeking consensus and starts prioritizing emotional safety. Translation: people cling to whatever story hurts least. That's why you feel that distance when you bring up uncomfortable truths. It's not that others can't see it, it's that seeing it would destabilize their internal scaffolding. This creates a unique kind of loneliness. Not being alone, but feeling unaccompanied in awareness. Historically, this is one of the most psychologically taxing phases a society goes through. Before collapses or major transformations, there's often a period where people sense something is wrong but can't agree on what it is. That ambiguity fractures communities long before institutions fall. You can feel it in how discussions turn hostile faster, how nuance disappears, how people mistake disagreement for threat. Life feels different because consensus, the glue of social life, is dissolving. And when shared meaning erodes, individuals retreat inward. You start trusting your own perceptions more than public narratives. That's not arrogance, it's survival. America feels unfamiliar because the collective we is thinning, replaced by millions of parallel realities that rarely intersect. And if you feel tired, isolated, but strangely clear-eyed, that's what it feels like to notice the shift while it's still happening. The unnatural calm before structural change. One of the strangest things you may have noticed lately is that, despite everything getting objectively harder, people don't seem as reactive as you'd expect. There isn't constant mass panic. There isn't sustained outrage. Instead, there's this eerie calm, like everyone is bracing without admitting it. Historically, this phase shows up right before major structural shifts, and it confuses people because they expect collapse to feel loud, but it rarely does. Sociologists call this adaptive normalization, where populations psychologically adjust to worsening conditions by lowering expectations rather than resisting. You can see it everywhere. People quietly downsizing dreams, redefining success downward, calling survival resilience. This isn't strength, it's triage. Studies after prolonged crises show that when stress becomes chronic instead of acute, the nervous system stops sounding alarms and enters conservation mode. That's why life feels muted. That's why even shocking news barely registers anymore. You're not desensitized, you're conserving emotional energy because your body senses instability that has no clear endpoint. Empires don't fall when people are hysterical. They unravel when people disengage. Late-stage societies often feel deceptively calm because people stop believing their reactions matter. That's the dangerous part. When people no longer expect systems to respond, they stop trying to influence them. You can feel this in voter fatigue, in declining civic participation, in the way people say, "it is what it is," about things that would have sparked outrage a decade ago. Life feels different because the emotional weather has changed. You're living in a holding pattern, not peace, not chaos, but suspension. And history shows that this calm doesn't last. It's the inhale before a collective exhale that reshapes everything. The growing sense that the future is being decided without you. The sense that the future is moving forward, but you're not part of the decision-making anymore. Not really. Policies change, technologies roll out, economic rules shift, and you're informed after the fact. This creates a deep existential discomfort that people often mistake for anxiety or depression. But it's neither. It's disempowerment. Political scientists note that when populations feel excluded from shaping the future, trust collapses even if material conditions haven't fully bottomed out yet. That's where America is now. Major decisions about labor, automation, housing, surveillance, and money are being made faster than the public can process them. And when the pace of change outstrips comprehension, people emotionally detach. That's why conversations about the future feel abstract or dystopian instead of hopeful. It's why long-term planning feels almost naive. You're sensing that systems are locking in trajectories without broad consent. Historically, this is when societies fracture into two groups: those who try to adapt individually and those who wait for permission that never comes. Life feels different because agency itself feels thinner. You're still responsible for outcomes, but less able to influence the rules. That mismatch creates a quiet resentment, not explosive, but corrosive. And when enough people feel that way, legitimacy erodes. Not overnight, slowly, invisibly, until suddenly it doesn't. If you felt like you're watching the future arrive through a window instead of a door, that's not imagination. That's what it feels like when a society transitions without fully acknowledging it's doing so. The moment you realize this isn't the end of something, it's the middle of a rewrite. What you're really feeling beneath the exhaustion, the confusion, the quiet dread, and the strange clarity is the realization that you're living through a transition most people are never taught how to recognize. Not collapse in the cinematic sense, not salvation either. A rewrite. And rewrites are always uncomfortable because the old rules still technically apply while the new ones haven't fully arrived yet. That in-between state is where anxiety thrives. Historically, this is the most disorienting phase for any society, when the past no longer explains the present, but the future hasn't revealed its logic. People expect turning points to announce themselves. They don't. They feel like dislocation, like living in a house where the furniture has been rearranged overnight in the dark. You keep bumping into things that used to be where you expected them. Economically, culturally, psychologically, the scaffolding that once made life feel predictable has shifted just enough to throw everything off balance. That's why nostalgia is everywhere right now. When societies enter transitional periods, people instinctively look backward because the past feels coherent, even if it wasn't perfect. Meanwhile, the present feels unmoored. But here's the part most people miss. Rewrites don't happen because societies fail. They happen because existing systems can no longer contain reality. The old American model was built for slower change, cheaper energy, simpler information flows, and tighter social cohesion. That world doesn't exist anymore, and your body knows it. That's why you feel both heavy and alert, tired but awake, detached yet deeply aware. You're not broken, you're recalibrating. Across history, the people who sense transitions early often feel isolated because language lags behind experience. There aren't words yet for what's forming. But this moment matters. Not because it's comfortable, because it's formative. The choices people make now, quietly, personally, in how they live, what they tolerate, what they withdraw from, and what they protect those choices, shape what comes next more than any headline ever will. Life feels different. Because it is different. Not worse in every way, not better either, just unresolved. And if you feel like you're standing on uncertain ground, unsure where to step next, that's exactly what it feels like to be alive at a turning point rather than a conclusion. If this video felt a little too accurate, that's because it's describing something most people are experiencing, but almost no one is saying out loud. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not too negative. You're responding normally to a world that's changing faster than the stories we were taught to believe about it. And whatever comes next, this moment matters, because transitions don't announce themselves in hindsight, only in how people choose to live while they're happening. So if you felt alone in this, you're not. More people are waking up, quietly, steadily, and that awareness is the first thing that actually changes the future. Stay grounded. Stay curious. And don't ignore what your instincts are trying to tell you. They've been right more often than you think.